Hello, and welcome to Scubocat 18's Season 1 review of Ed, and Eddy. Alright, this is something I've been working on for a few weeks. I just finished the script, and I say, let's go. The Ed Touchables. The pilot always has a lot to live up to, and in this case, it really does establish the premise, settings, and dynamics between the characters. Double D loses his magnifying glass, and Eddy believes that someone is stealing other people's things, which is definitely something we all thought at one point or another. They even get away with a torture scene, and those faces are just priceless. Nagged to Ed. Here, we have the first appearance of the Kanker sisters. It's pretty funny with their reactions to the Eds just being themselves. And don't lie, who else wants to eat that burger? I always figured it tasted like Sloppy Joe. Either way, it's a great intro to some good villains. Pop Goes the Ed. This episode was first inspired by Danny Antonucci's childhood. The Eds are invited to a sprinkler party in confining swimsuits, where they essentially make everyone uncomfortable, leading to relatable hijinks up to 11. Probably the best one so far. Over Your Ed. After an NOG drink scam goes awry due to Ed's stench, they decide to give him an image makeover. He's then dressed snazzily and given all sorts of epic catchphrases. Meanwhile, Double D accidentally ingests too much sugar, and throughout the whole episode, he's hilariously energetic. Sir Ed-a-Lot. Ed has to babysit Sarah, and Eddy decides to get in for the pay. I can see why some people may find it annoying, but I personally think that the episode's pretty funny. Gosh, that race scene, man. Also, does that have a chin? A pinch to grow an Ed. After the kids believe that Eddy is short, Double D makes him some boots that increase his height, and he decides to have a bit of catharsis. The way they go about making him taller are by far the highlight of the episode, but the whole thing is pretty good. Dawn of the Eds. After refunding soda bottles, the Eds decide to go to an adults-only movie where Ed states that rated R movies on TV really suck. They are actually launched off course and enter the Junkyard. There, they decide to have their own adventure in their own minds, which obviously makes it by far the most charming. And is it just me, or did Ed prove that he's the bravest, with saving Kevin from the Kankers? While there's some more of an anticlimax, an ending doesn't always ruin a story. Vert-Ed Go. This is probably the closest to the Three Stooges the show gets, what with the trio trying to make a clubhouse and all the hilarious complications that go about, like Ed being scared of heights out of nowhere, Eddy threatening Plank, Ed's helmet on his butt, or the water balloon fight. After they finish construction, they go tell the kids who, for probably the first time in the series, figure out their money-hungry tactics and don't entirely believe that they really have one. And when they come back, they unfortunately find that the Kankers shanghaied it. Read all about Ed. Eddy finds that Double D has a paper route so that he can afford a very expensive and impractical microscope. Of course, Eddy being Eddy decides to order at least 50 different routes so they can pay for about 50 times the normal amount, and has no real intentions of helping. While it may sound a little dull, I personally think it is pretty good and knows the audience. The audience knows the characters this time. Quick Shot Ed. A lot of people say this one has a weird aura around it. Well, it does seem a tad different. I never really picked up on that. The main trio find a camera and eventually decide to take pictures of the kids of the cul-de-sac to sell a calendar. In the middle of summer, whatever. While they take pictures, Double D refers to the kids as animals in the wild, so in a way, this episode can serve as somewhat educational. And at the end, Eddy gets too greedy and initially decides to photograph the Kanker sisters, which obviously results in his downfall. In Ed Too Many, after given a rare flower, Sarah becomes smitten with Double D, leading to the jealousy of Jimmy, and it has some of the funniest reactions from him, and the fact that the cul-de-sac softie is acting all tough makes the whole episode. There's also the Eds trying to hide from Sarah the whole show. Ed and Seek. The neighborhood kids play a massive game of hide and seek that the Eds want to join in. When they do, they are confronted with one problem. Anyone can be home free if they tag this tree. They try to find a way to hide for the whole game with no penalties, and ultimately ruin numerous trees. Look into my Eds. So, after Double D gets a psychology manual, the Eds find inside it a hypnotizing wheel. And right there, you know exactly the type of length this episode is going to go to, or do, you. This is by far one of the best plot-driven episodes of the whole season, and it gets even better almost every time I watch it. Definitely a top 10 of the season. First you have the Eds go crazy with it, then you have Ed, then you have the Kanker sisters who completely turn the tables on the entire trio. Tag your Ed. Eddy decides to get Double D less of a weakling, and gets him into wrestling. He then becomes the masked mumbler, and after one fight with Plank, the Eds have a whole match with the Kankers. Surprisingly enough, they actually win in the end. Fool on the Ed. After Eddy fools his friends and christens himself king of all the pranksters and makes a bet that he can prank every cul-de-sac kid, this proves difficult when Rolf, Jonny, Sarah, and Kevin are all pranked by the mysterious prankmaster. A Boy and His Ed. Eddy regrets insulting Kevin after he learns his father has a new job at the Jawbreaker factory. They try everything to get on his good side, from dressing like him, to cheering him on, to even cleaning his chimney, but all these acts make the strain even worse. It's Way Ed. All the kids are enthralled in the latest fads, and the trio try their hardest to keep up until eventually deciding to come up with their own fads for the majority of the runtime. This is so funny it doesn't even need commentary. But I will not understate the difficulty in making an episode about fads that doesn't immediately date itself. The writers definitely had quite the issue on their hands, and they completely resolved it. Laugh, Ed, laugh. In a tragic turn of events, this episode was a prophecy. Every kid in the cul-de-sac, outside of the main three, are all under quarantine with the chicken pox, and throughout the whole runtime, Eddy gets more and more and more insane, gambling with squirrels, treating acorns like money, turning his tongue into a turban, and numerous other things that highlight why this show was so amazing and hilarious over all these years. A Glass of Warm Ed. Ed is revealed to not only sleepwalk, but also sleep-eat. In a hilarious episode, Ed is relentless and insatiable in his subconscious state, to the point where he nearly consumes Jimmy. Double D decided to help him through the night, easier said than done, but somehow in the end they managed to make a killing reselling the food for the hungry denizens. Flea-Bitten Ed. A pet cleaning service is set up for Rolf's 4- and 2-legged friends. All goes swimmingly until Ed has a reaction after Rolf's bunnies multiply. This leads to a very interesting situation where the other two hold on to the scab to help Ed get through his ailments. And after all the humorous things going on, they find that the rabbits have gone out of hand, so to speak. Who, what, where, Ed? So, The Eds try to make eggs, but they're all ruined. So they go to Rolf to get an egg, but he needs sawdust. So they go to Kevin, who needs paint for his shed. They go to Jimmy, who wants clams. Jonny has clams, but wants an anchor. The Cankers have an anchor, but won't comply. Jonny offers an alternative as a badminton racket. In exchange, Sarah wants a teddy bear. They go back to Jimmy, who asks for plums. They go back to Rolf, who first is insistent on sawdust, but manages to find an alternative in Ed's yo-yo. This episode is really one of those that goes everywhere, and you can't help but enjoy the ride. Keeping up with the Eds. In another relatable situation, Double D is told by his father, via sticky note, that he has to mow the lawn, something which he absolutely detests. They get Ed to do it, and unfortunately it makes most of the land bare, until Eddy decides to bring in manure to grow it, and put it on all the kids' lawns so they can mow for a price. When it gets out of control, they go get Rolf's goat, Victor, who proves to be completely out of control and consumes the grass until he is utterly full. Exaggerate. One of Eddy's scams crashes into the side of Kevin's house, and rather than showing responsibility, he claims it was the Mucky Boys, who are a feral bunch. Somehow, Kevin believes this and gets the entire neighborhood to join in to search for these fictitious creatures. It's then that they act like the fake things by scaring the kids and eventually wind up in a piece of concrete. But there is a silver lining, and Jonny gives them a hammer discreetly, which of course Ed mistakes for a tarantula. Oath to an Ed. After disintegrating their new clothing, the Eds find Rolf, Jonny, Jimmy, and Plank in a Boy Scouts-type organization as the Urban Rangers, and want to join them purely based on their uniforms. The tests somehow proved to be difficult, despite being relatively simplistic. Eddy is given multiple tries, but it seems that fate has conspired against him to the point where he can't even microwave food. But let's be honest, sicking Sarah on him was a very stupid decision. Button your Ed. After Ed bursts through Double D's screen door, a fly enters his house and lodges himself in Eddy's throat, leading him to be mute the entire episode. So he's given a bell to communicate that Rolf claims he is an expert at deciphering. At first, Rolf claims that Eddy wishes to be fed immaturely. Then he believes him to partake in synchronized swimming. Then he has the unicycle of doom and facing his greatest fear. At first, this episode may seem harsh, but that hypothesis is diminished when you realize just how over the top all these activities are in reality. Avast ye Eds. The Eds make a relaxing creek cruise with Jimmy and Jonny, which is hilarious all by itself, what with 88 Fingers Edward, Fruit Pulp, and The Only Towel. But what makes it even better is that their boat is shanghaied by the Cankers, who act like real pirates, and we get an invigorating chase scene. There is something to say about this episode, given that it was the last of Season 1. And if you ask me, it was a really high note, and it just may be the best season finale they ever did.